We have in front of us a very pregnant political cycle in Europe, as you all know. You have a very chaotic situation in Italy, you have elections in Netherlands, in Germany, in France, and so on. How do you think all those changes are going to affect the stability of the Eurozone?
Well, the first observation I would like to make is something that was also noted by other participants, is that the recent changes in the political landscape of Europe, the rise in populism, in nationalism and extremism, reflect, in my view, to a very large extent, the experience of the public during the crisis and the perceptions they've had that dealing with the crisis was not as effective and efficient as could have been because of the adverse effects of cross-border integration and the policies that were implemented by institutions. So in order to deal more in the medium to long term, and I'll come to the immediate in a second, with the undesirable changes in the political landscape, I think it is important, as has been stressed by many, that a lot of work is being done in order both to strengthen growth in the euro area as a whole, but also to address the disparities within countries and the divergences between countries. Now, the forthcoming elections, of course, in the Netherlands, in France, and later in Germany, pose a threat. But in my mind, and they could create disruptions, but in my mind, this threat, despite everything that we know, is relatively contained and manageable for a number of reasons. Let me refer first to the Netherlands, where Mr. Wilders, according to opinion polls, is likely to be the winner in terms of seats in the parliament in that country. At the same time, it is very unlikely that he will be able either to lead the government or to participate in a coalition government, because the majority of all other parties have said, at least so far, that they are not planning to join. So although it is true that we have the political development that in principle creates a threat to the European Union, this may not actually happen. Now, with regard to France, as you all know, most opinion polls so far suggest that Marine Le Pen will likely participate in the second round. And actually, according to the polls that I have seen, the support she gets, she's expected to get in the second round, ranges between 33 and 43%. So it's not likely, on the basis of development so far, that she will win. Of course, we have 2 months ahead of us, and events can change. But the specific factor that also contains the risk to the European Union, and the risk in the case of Le Pen is greater because she has explicitly stated that she would like to take France outside of the euro. And if France gets out of the euro, I think the euro disintegrates, or it becomes something small and possibly irrelevant, to use the term of Lucas. But even in the rather unlikely event that Marine Le Pen wins the presidential elections, it is very unlikely that it will have a lot of power in the parliament. At present, her party has only 2 seats, and although this is likely to increase, it is not likely to be significant. And legislation is necessary in order to be able to move forward on the euro policies. Let me stop here. Of course, the most important election is in September with Germany, but at this point, it seems that the 2 major parties, CDU and SPD, are going to have together the support of more than 60% of the people. So again, there is a rise of populism and Eurosceptic parties, but this is not sufficient in order to, let's say, create serious political threats to the future of Europe.
Somebody else wants to take a pick of this?
2 points regarding elections in Europe. One is that the series of elections means that the European Union is most unlikely to take any important decision until we have concluded the round of elections. In other words, we very much hope that nothing dramatic happens until the end of September, because it will be very difficult for the European Union and individual member countries to handle the problem. On the other hand, in the end of those elections, I mean, I believe that any even mild relaunching, rebooting of the system requires an initiative from Berlin with the support of Paris, with a government that has a reform agenda. These are the two prerequisites for anything to happen in Europe. So what happens in France and Germany will largely determine whether we are able to go beyond the status quo or not.
Very briefly, to agree with the previous speakers on that, I think that at the level of the election results, you're probably going to see that we are coming out of this, if we believe the polls as they are now, without any catastrophes. But however, let me put the word of caution. I think the election results are one thing, but I think the kind of debate and the long-term shaping of public opinion, I mean, these parties will not go away easily. And it will, I think, be too easy to say that, okay, I mean, if we get through the electoral year 2017 without too much injuries, I mean, everything will be fine. So I think there will be all the aspects that have been mentioned here as challenges and as our tasks to bring the European project further will have to continue also after this year and during this year particularly, because you will need some advocates to go for the European case. I fully agree that, of course, Berlin and Paris will have to play a key role. This is one of the how shall I say, I mean, tragicomic things that we experience in Europe. I have lived through periods where there was extremely good Franco-German cooperation, and you had all the other ambassadors queuing up in Berlin complaining about that everything is done by Berlin and Paris, letting others out. And when there were times of crisis and nothing was happening, you had the same ambassadors coming to us and saying, well, could you please sort out the differences so that we can go on with our European project? May I just say that yes, the Franco-German project within the EU will be essential. However, if we look at the centrifugal powers in the European Union, I mean, we have had big hopes many years ago after the German unification in creating something like what we call the Weimar Triangle, bringing into a member state, of course, from the group of new member states to sort of support this project also and to represent a pillar of the bold European steps that we would need. So that remains very difficult. So, I mean, there's a lot of work ahead.
Can I do a brief?
Sure.
I just... Is it... It is working. Oh, I have to speak closer to it, okay. I just want to say on the question of elites, I don't think they're simply people you disagree with. I think it's very largely an urban bubble. These are the people who occupy most of the positions in the media, in the chief political offices, and the people outside, the people in the countryside, in the small towns, have different values and different aspirations. I noticed that when Stockholm had their vote on, when Sweden had its vote on whether to join the euro, Stockholm was in favor. Everywhere else was against. It's an urban bubble, like I refer to. And I think we've seen the same happen in America and in Britain. On the question of populism, are we just going to hope that Marine Le Pen doesn't win, that Wilders doesn't win, or are we going to do something about it? In Britain, the Conservative Party has started to adopt policies to draw in those people from the north of England, from the small towns, from the forgotten towns. It started to modify its policies in order to prevent a right-wing extremist party capturing them.
Let me ask a question about the impact of the German elections. And I will ask you, Mr. Wieser, about this, because there's a lot of speculation in this country and in Europe. I will not ask you, I will not, there's a lot of speculation about whether the current economic paradigm is going to change according to the German election result. Without going perhaps into specifics, but what's your assessment on this?
Thanks for an easy question. What I notice is that very much of this debate is around will Europe shudder to a standstill because there are elections in Germany on the 24th of September? And most people would say, yes, of course. On the other hand, does that hinder the Italian government from implementing the necessary reforms in the area of labor market legislation, pensions, etc., etc.? Does it stop the Spanish government from doing something? All of this evidently not. And if we see where the problems of the last 8 years stemmed from, they were a mixture of systemic issues and countries that were not well prepared for the technology shock and the globalization shock. So looking at our work in Brussels, I don't think that the German elections will be that much of an issue in stopping work. I think it is rather the big question that heads of state are faced with. Do we dare to begin and possibly conclude a deep debate about the future of Europe, where it might, at the end, result in people saying we need treaty change, upon which everybody in Brussels faints and says treaty change, never again. We don't dare to go down that road. If we don't have treaty change and we don't want complete standstill, that is then when we enter the area of intergovernmental cooperation. And I and many people in the room have spent the last couple of years very much engaged in an area of intergovernmental cooperation, and I can tell you it's very, very difficult. And it slows down things appreciably because you have to have everybody on board, completely on board, not even neutral. You have to be for something. So I think that is where we will be going. I think the German elections facilitate, and the French elections facilitate things in a way that we then have a stretch of 4 years ahead of us with no elections, hopefully in any of the two countries. But of course we've got the Italian elections coming up at an unknown point in time between now and spring 2018. So maybe it's even positive that we now have a certain reflection period and then the possibility of change ahead. But I would not be too optimistic. We need some outside catalyst to generate an enthusiasm for some sea changes to how we cooperate in Europe. Let's hope that the catalyst will be a good one.
Thank you. I had another question of whether you can think of a Eurogroup without Mr. Schäuble's presence, but I will not ask you that. I'm pretty sure. But whether you can think of a Eurogroup without Mr. Schäuble present. But let me ask you about the German elections and their impact on fiscal policy.
Well, in that regard, I would basically side with Thomas's answer in on how to look at the German election. I think this period matters for a European agenda and for moving forward a European agenda. Otherwise, there is not a point that there is a standstill in Europe at the national level because there's elections in some countries. Will it change the fiscal policy position in Germany? Well, that depends obviously on what the candidates make out of it in terms of the agenda forthcoming and whether there will be a continuous policy of a black zero after the election will depend on the electoral result. And maybe then with a stronger social democratic influence, that is not the case, but that's pure speculation at this stage.
Okay. Let me move the discussion on to the security issue. You all said, or some of you said, that Europe has been spoiled after the war because the security needs were taken care of by the US. This is not the case anymore because of the Trump presidency. Who is going to fill the vacuum? And let me ask you with you, start with you, Mr. Piri, because I cannot think of a Europe dealing with security issues without the UK. At the same time, the UK is too small these days to deal with security issues. So what's the solution after Brexit?
Well, the UK has already indicated that it intends to remain part of the European security network. There are many other European supranational organizations that it has said it intends to remain part of. I think you can expect Britain to play a full part in any future security arrangements that are made.
Let me ask you, Mr. Ambassador, because there is a clear need for leadership there in terms of building up security capabilities, intelligence capabilities, and so on. Is Germany willing to fill that void? Because, I mean, so far, you have been very hesitant for historical reasons to do that. Is that going to change, you think?
I think we are not going to assume, Germany is not going to assume any kind of leadership role in this area. What I noticed from the German debate, and what some of you might have noticed, is there is, of course, there has been the historical hesitation in my country for obvious reasons to acquire, how shall I say, a prominent profile in the area of defense and security policy. However, we have been, of course, a very loyal and good and paying member of NATO and on the EU military structures. My former foreign minister, Steinmeier, he launched a debate actually when he took office as a foreign minister for the second time, which was directed towards the German public in trying to debate with town hall meetings and with citizens about the philosophy that Germany, or the approach that Germany should have vis-à-vis international security. And the objective was that to explain to our citizens in Germany, which are, I mean, hesitant to talk about these issues, pacifist, of course, for obvious and, if I may say so, probably good reasons, that the period has come where people now look at Germany in a different role. I mean, whereas in the past everybody understood that Germany could not have a leading profile in security and defense policy, now there is a debate which is coming from outside Germany to us, imported, saying that, I mean, if I'm really honest to say that, are we not hiding behind the reasons of our past in trying to acquire a more active profile in defense and security policy? And this is a debate which I think has to be underpinned in Germany by a public consensus building, first of all, and this will not take not happen from one day to the next. I mean, my new minister has said at his recent visit in the Baltic states that when faced with, of course, the demands that we now hear from Washington in burden sharing in security and defense, which are maybe really which may be justified because so many countries are below the 2% target. He said that, I mean, do our European neighbors and partners really want a Germany who spends 60 billion euros every year on defense? Is that going to be acceptable? So my answer to your question is there will be a change in attitude, and also, of course, there will be an expectation that security and defense policies and contributions to security and defense policy are not only looked at in terms of percentage of armaments, spending on armaments and these kind of issues, but also in everything else that concerns the conflict management toolbox of the European Union, like the many things we do in peace missions and preventive diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and so on. So there's a whole basket of things that belong to it. And I think in my country, only if you put that debate in that broader context, you will find a possibility to get more acceptance of that stronger role that people expect from Germany.
Let me just elaborate on this, because I mean, you have probably noticed that Europe is not taken very seriously in terms of hard power around the world. And one of the reasons is the famous Kissinger saying that if you want to reach in an emergency somewhere at the White House, you can't. If you want to do it in Europe, you don't know who to call, and you might wait 2 or 3 days until there's a consensus. Is that going to change, or is that Because that's a critical part of the security umbrella.
Well, I think there are many possibilities, and some of them have been brought now recently into the debate, like for example, using defense policy as a precursor for a more avant-garde project, and maybe to try to do things which the Lisbon Treaty actually allows. We have the possibility of structured cooperation in defense. So of course, you know, in view of the security challenges that we face, it is not surprising that that field of policy is mentioned as one of the possible areas where we might do more. And of course, I mean, there are people who, I mean, in my country who believe there is actually, should be a prospect for something like a European army. There should be much more possibilities in integrating our command structures. There is a debate for many years. There is a debate on pooling our expenses on procurement of armaments, of course, where we could make big economies of scale if one looks at what everybody individually spends into that. Yes, I would say there is space. But I would tend to agree with something that one of the speakers before said, that we must be careful not to create a sort of a variable geometry à la carte. I think one of the main challenges will be that we also create some logic to in which areas we do what and with whom, because otherwise it may become very chaotic and may actually add to the problems.
Luca?
It is, of course, understandable that Berlin is hesitant in taking an openly leadership role in foreign policy and defense, although in practice it has done so on several occasions, and quite rightly so. I mean, who is leading Europe's intermediary role in the Ukraine? Okay? Who has done so in Syria? It is essentially Berlin, often followed by Paris. And I would go a bit further. Suppose, and of course this is not something I'm looking forward to, but suppose there is some incident in the Aegean. In the past, if something happened, the instinctive reaction was to phone Washington to intervene. Now, there is a strong possibility that Washington may not even care less about what happens in the Aegean.
You're moving on to the next panel now, I have to warn you.
Okay, and I will stop there. So if Washington is not interested, who do you think that people would be tempted to phone? Probably Berlin, today.
We will not ask you what the response will be. That's you want to add something to this? Yeah, okay.
Just to add a word on what has been said. It seems to me that for Europe and the European Union to address effectively the geopolitical challenges, I think the time has come for an integrated defense policy. And in my mind also, this could provide not only a possibility, but also an opportunity to relate this with a higher degree of fiscal integration by having a specific budget which would be employed in order to finance the appropriate infrastructure and the modalities of operations. Now, I would agree with you that two things. First of all, that not all countries would be ready to join such an initiative. And for the case of defense, of a more integrated defense, it will be the only reasonable way forward would be with a multiple speed approach. But I would also agree with you that this is not the approach that we would like to follow on other fronts, particularly relating to the economic policies in the monetary union. Now, as you said, Germany may not be right now in a position to take leadership on this, but I think it's important for all countries involved, and there are quite a few that face external challenges, to think a little bit forward and avoid to have a repetition of what happened in the case of the euro crisis, that there was hesitation on what to do until the shocks were so large that they forced actions in the direction of completing and strengthening the economic union. So to conclude with a particular example that Lucas gave, we may have either an event in the Aegean, we may have another event in Ukraine, or internal threats associated with the Middle East situation, which may force decisions and steps in the direction of a more integrated defense policy. But since it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and plan to do something like that, it would seem to me that the time has come to think seriously about this. And the position of the administration of President Trump, at least the way it has been presented so far, I think gives great impetus for such a policy.
But you know, I think the problem right now is that we're thinking inside the bubble. Because if you look around Europe, you will see that people are moving in a more protectionist, nationalistic way. They don't want more Europe, they want probably less Europe. So how do you reconcile those two? I mean, clearly there's a need for a more, coherent and stronger Europe, but at the same time, political forces are pulling it the other way. Take it down.
I would tend to think of Europe as a flotilla of boats which are moving in a certain direction, and up to now the instinct has been that all of these boats, they need to move forward constantly. And that is what you would call more Europe. And I don't think that there's hesitation amongst populations on having more Europe in a number of areas. Look, for example, at the discussion that came from the summit in Bratislava. People want more Europe in terms of internal security, and they want more Europe in terms of external security, both as regards border-related measures and possibly also on the military front. They want more Europe to the extent that it can help with unemployment, with youth unemployment. And they probably want less Europe in telling people in which form you should be serving olive oil in restaurants, etc., etc. So concentrating on those things which have very much to do with the attitude of people, which very much have things to do with the problems, which are the major problems at this stage. I think nothing precludes us from moving and moving and moving. But we should not give in to the temptation of saying, we'll do something in every area. And the areas where I don't think we will have very much change in the coming years are those which impinge on the sovereignty of member states, parliaments, in the field, for example, of taxation, of budget, and the like. That is the issue of fiscal union, where I think we will have to find, at least in the medium term, different ways of ensuring that we don't have more accidents happening from fiscal imbalances. So the last 15, 20 years have very much been about, 25 years have been very much about building an economic policy house in Europe, and the next 5 to 10 years will be about different issues.
So you want to take it?
Yes, I would very much agree with Thomas on the fact that it's not a unanimous call for less Europe. That there are certainly areas where people want to see Europe very strongly, and if you look at the Eurobarometer data, I find it pretty much striking that migration is defined in people's mind as a European problem. Unemployment is more a national problem that at least comes across there in many countries. So there is a call then also for European solution and a benchmark for success and failure. Now, Thomas said there's the point about the economic area here, and yes, there is not necessarily consensus on the recipes how to go forward, but it's obviously also a question of smart solutions, right? And maybe it's also made a question of what you actually propose for the way forward. And when you think about, say, a common fiscal capacity at the euro area, which I think, yes, can contribute to the robustness of the euro area, then there is a point mutualization will not go, but mutualization is also not necessary at a certain at this stage, and maybe it can come later. So it's a question of what you propose and what is the process and the path you derive, and there we need smart solutions. And the formula that was put forward at a political level of a combination of risk reduction and risk sharing, I think is a very good one and can actually pave a way forward.
Yes, and I think if Europe did concentrate on the big things, the things that people think matter, there would be less chance of provoking the kind of resentment that was aroused in Britain. The fact is that 90% of British businesses do not export to Europe. All of them, 100%, have to obey all of the European regulations. And there was widespread resentment. There was a movie called Brexit, the movie, which had attracted over 2 million views in Britain before the referendum. And it just listed, it went through a day in the life of an ordinary British person and the number of regulations they'd have to obey, 247 concerning your bathroom towels, you know. And British people really didn't want other people telling them how big their electric kettles could be, how powerful their light bulbs could be, what capacity their vacuum cleaners were allowed to be. I think if you concentrate on the big things, you won't arouse that kind of resentment.
Let me touch on another issue which, as you know, has been very hot lately, which is Russia. And there are two schools of thought. One is that Russia is trying to divide Europe. It's playing games with elections, manipulating public opinion, and so on. There's another school of thought which says that, you know, there should be a rapprochement between Europe and a more realpolitik approach. Your take, Luca?
Well, Europe is clearly divided between, I try to simplify a bit, between those countries that think that Russia can be a strategic partner of Europe, and others who think that Russia is essentially an enemy to be dealt with as effectively as possible. And the differences in views have to do, of course, with geography, with history, but many other things. And Russia is one of the most difficult things that Europe can get an agreement on, because our perspectives are so different. Now, is Russia revisionist? And again, it depends how you define revisionist and who sets the rules that people want to revise. Okay, if you talk to Mr. Putin and many of the Russians, they say that it was the West that established certain rules or changed the system and then forced the Russians to react. Our view is generally different. It is that Putin tries to revisit the existing rules. Relations with Russia are will be a determining factor in the ability of Europeans to have a minimum of a common foreign policy, because we share a neighborhood, because we are dependent on energy from Russia, and we have to find the modus vivendi. Okay? Now, of course, I'm not a great fan of Mr. Putin, but I think it would be fair to start our discussion by recognizing that Europeans have also committed huge mistakes in dealing with Russia in recent years. Ukraine, not only one of them.
I would only comment on this with great hesitation. I think the two schools of thought that you presented, yes, they are there, but on the other hand, if you think about, and there are others in the room who are a lot better equipped to answer Russia questions than me, but I think the real issue is how do we create a policy mix in the European Union which, on the one hand, pays tribute to the legitimate concerns, especially of our member states in Eastern Europe, but also pays tribute to the fact that Russia is just there. And you just said it. I mean, we have this situation of interdependence. We have our values and our norms. So I think I think the state the art will be to design a policy which is going a little bit beyond this binary approach, to say. Either you are a strategic partner or you're a strategic threat. And yes, things have changed dramatically. I mean, we didn't expect the history to turn out like it has done over the past 15 years. I remember the time when Mr. Putin was speaking in the German Bundestag and he was applauded some years ago. So it's a very tricky question, and I think this brings me back to the idea that we have to bring about it that member states can unite behind a European policy vis-à-vis Russia. But I mean, what this policy should be is so it should be it's probably such a mobile target, because we are always reacting. We don't have the capacity to really set the agenda in the way we want to. So I don't have the crystal ball to answer your question, Alexis. I'm sorry.
Let me we'll conclude this conversation with a Greek epilogue, as you would expect. So I will start with you, Mr. Wieser, and I want to ask you whether the Grexit scenario is off the table or not, and whether you really think Greece is going to make it, whether Greece will be able to get access to the markets and get back to, back sort of on a cycle of growth.
Grexit was indeed at one stage on the table, not least in market perceptions. And I very strongly believe that this is completely changed. And we are now in the midst of the second review of the third program, which is a bit depressing because the program has been running for 1.5 years and we haven't even finished the second review. So that makes you sort of pause for thought and say, can we accelerate a little bit, just a wee little bit? And we've had terribly difficult times. We've got one more difficulty ahead of us in this summer. And we've got 1 or 2 more very difficult decisions to take. But technically, it is very easy. If you would want, you could probably wrap up the second review, at least the agreement on policies, by Friday next week, if everybody wants. So, but there are a couple of parties involved. And with that, and with a decision then at the Eurogroup on the financing and on these debt-related issues, and I believe a strong chance of the IMF coming in with a program, from then on it would be considerably easier sailing than all of these choppy waters and turbulences we've had over the last 6 or 7 years. And there have been quite a lot of people, not only in this country, who've been having these nice dreams about having a program without the IMF. And you simply need to be realistic. A program without the IMF means that this program shudders to a halt. You need a Euro summit or 2 to discuss what then to do further. Ministers and heads of state would possibly say we need a change to the ESM treaty and ask us to work on it over the autumn. And once we've done all of that, there might then be a new program. But we don't want to wait until the autumn, because waiting is now the catastrophic thing, the most stupid thing which we could do. There are signs of growth, there are signs of imbalances receding, maybe in the last few days, not with regard to deposits, but there are positive signs, and they can either go under or they can significantly strengthen over the coming months. So it's not in anybody's hand in this room. All of the hands are somewhere else. So let's hope that they reach a very rapid decision. And then not only Grexit is off the table, but many of the negative imbalances that the country is now experiencing will fairly rapidly get better.
But as you know, it will take 2 to make this a perfect tango, in the sense that there will be...
Or 5.
Well, yeah, by your account. There needs to be a decision on the debt issue as well, as you know. for this to work. Is this politically feasible before September?
Sure. I think there's been, it's a very easy question. How to answer. There's been already some specification on, quite some specification on what would happen in the short term, and Rolf and his people are now implementing it. And this has chopped, I think, Rolf, 20 percentage points of the long run debt to GDP ratio of Greece. That's not peanuts, 20%. No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm louder. I'm louder. And there is a very clear commitment that additional things will happen at the end of the program under certain conditions. There are people in the IMF who want much more specification. So we will see then at that Eurogroup which will decide everything and which could come about fairly rapidly. Not new measures, but what kind of more precision can be given to the already committed measures. And that is one of the things that I think people outside Europe do not understand, that a political commitment by 19 ministers and the institutions to do something in mid-2018 is just as binding as if it were constitutionally enshrined. It is a clear, irrevocable political commitment on which nobody will turn his or her back. And that is something that in the normal international order is very difficult to understand, because normally promises are made to be either broken or not broken. But this is part of the political makeup of the European Union, that such a political statement it does not disappear.
Thank you. So?
Yeah, let me here make 2 points. One, as to the speed of the adjustment program and what is needed now. I mean, for us, if we take the experience across all countries where there were adjustment programs, it's very clear the one decisive factor for the speed of reforms and adjustment is simply the ownership of the government. That is counts across all countries, and that also counts here in Greece. And if you look at the current situation, what is needed, I mean, Thomas said, yes, there were those signs of incipient growth, and the institutions projected more than 2% growth for this year. What that takes is investment, and for investment to be forthcoming, and that has also come across in other discussions here, it takes confidence, and confidence relies on decisive government action and the continuous program. That is why it's so important to really go ahead with it. Second point, really to make it also very clear on the short-term debt measures that this is something that is not possibly to be implemented. It is something that we are doing now, and it's something sizable and important. So Thomas said, I mean, the estimated effect of it in the long run could be reducing the debt level by 20 percentage point. It reduces the flow of financing requirements by 5 percentage points. We have started doing this, and that is something also that the Greek people should be aware about. So we are issuing now long-term bonds in order to finance cheaply Greek loans in the very long run. We have issued a 39-year bond. We have issued a 30-year bond. We have restructured, or we have smoothened the profile of the loans in order to make it really manageable for Greece, and within the limits of the current agreement, put it actually to the maximum. So we using the full space of the 32.5 years of average weighted maturity for Greek loans. And that's a big, I mean, it's a big advantage that Greece has, and that one should be aware. We have also taken a third step, which is a waiver of a step-up coupon that we had, which is a small thing, but as such, it's 220 million. And there could be more as medium-term measures. So I think also Greek people should be very well aware that there are actual steps taken right now, and those are meaningful.
And you think Greece will make the QE in time, and will that have an impact on the banks and on the economy?
Well, Q is not there. You don't have to talk to us, right? There is a different actor out there, and that different actor will take an independent decision. I think it will take the closure of the review, and then they will have to make up their mind.
First, on the question that you raised about the likelihood of Grexit, I would agree, of course, that at this point, the probability, the likelihood of such an event is remote. However, at the same time, I think we have to keep in mind that we have to avoid economic policy actions, communication and political events, which can increase very quickly this probability. And we saw over the past month, when there were tensions and difficulties with the negotiations, how bond spreads rose substantially, and the issue became again front-page news on some newspapers. Now, regarding the completion of the second review, I believe that it will be completed because the government has strong political incentives to do that, and the alternative would be disastrous. Now, the combination of a successful completion, we do not know, of course, the exact content, and we are not sure, at least I don't, the timing when this will take place. But when it happens, and especially if it's followed by some significant further debt relief, the so-called medium-term measures, I think, of course, this can be expected that it will boost confidence and will support a faster recovery than otherwise would be the case. But the point that I would like to make is to look a little bit more over the longer term, that such developments will clearly be positive, and they can strengthen the economic recovery in the short run. But if the country is going to achieve strong and durable growth in the years to come, we have to address the fundamental factors, the obstacles to growth in the past. And there is a lot has to be done, although I agree with what Rolf said before, that significant progress has been made both in the area of reforms and also in improving substantially the fiscal position of the country. But these policies have not been sufficient to make a real difference in terms of changing the long-term growth potential of the country. So I think much more work will have to be done, and in particular, in the area of improving the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the quality of the public sector. And the public sector includes education, it includes health, it includes all kinds, the judicial system, where the functioning of these systems, the subsystems of the public sector, have been inhibiting factors. And these inhibiting factors will have to be addressed if we want to look forward to a growth that will not be only in 2017 and 2018, but in the years to come.
The view from Berlin, and whether you think it's feasible to have decisions on the debt before the elections.
Well, first of all, let me say that and I'm speaking under the control of Thomas Wieser and others, I see nobody in the Eurozone who's talking about Brexit. On the contrary, I see announcements from everybody that they are in favor of concluding the review as quickly as possible. And I think also that what was mentioned before by Mr. Strauch, that we should not underestimate the importance of the short-term measures, which are more substantial than sometimes is portrayed also here in this country. I can fully agree to what Mr. Papademos said. I think if you speak to investors from my country, and I know it also from other countries, I think there is a recognition of the enormous path that has already been walked in the adjustment agenda. There have been many difficult reforms in many areas that have been achieved, which should not be underestimated. And I think the big challenge is going to be exactly that how the ownership of the reforms that I have no doubt exists can also be communicated to the outside world, to investors, to make sure that the growth agenda is a growth agenda which is sustainable and also sustainable beyond 2019. Therefore, I believe that everything that the government can do to create this confidence is the right thing. But for Brexit at the moment, I don't see. This is not a discussion as far as I can. As far as I can say from Athens. On the debt, I think we had an agreement on the 16th of May of last year, which I think even after the talks of last month, still stands. How we are going to work through the different scenarios and whether it's possible to amend or interpret things that have been decided, I'm the wrong person to ask. This is for others.
Okay, let me turn the last question to you, Mr. Visser, because you've been associated with the Greek program, with this modern Greek Odyssey, from the beginning. So I want to ask you two questions. One is whether you think there was any critical mistake made from the inception of this program until now. And the second question is, if you had your own wish, because I do know that you care very much about this country, if there was one thing you would like to change in this country that would make a real difference and make Greece less of a special case, what would that be? We'll start with the mistake, not with the easy one.
You're a good friend. It's something I ask myself nearly every day. And I think we all made mistakes, and not only from 2010 onwards. And we've learned a lot, and I very often wish that I knew back in 2010 what I know today. And I often wish that my colleagues in Athens, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Luxembourg, Frankfurt had known back in 2010 what we all know in 2017, but we didn't. And it started, if you so want, of course, from the fallacy of the Maastricht Treaty, that there could be no balance of payment crisis within a monetary union. And the belief was so firm that actually we have a balance of payment support instrument for countries outside monetary union, but we abolished it for inside the monetary union. For a variety of reasons which are of course well known. So then all of a sudden it happened. The unthinkable happened, and not only were we unprepared for it in terms of our thinking, we didn't have the instruments. And it was like learning to cook whilst producing your first cordon bleu. We had to learn the recipe, we had to learn how to handle the stove, we had to learn what is flour and what is milk and what are the eggs. And we had very many cooks, but not that many waiters. So I would say the Maastricht Treaty itself had important lacunae. We built up imbalances in the first decade of monetary union, some of which were due to integration euphoria. Think of I think the bubble in Spain, for example, was a one-off, which was very much triggered by interest rate convergence, etc. And some of it was structural. There were huge mistakes made in Greek fiscal policy, but many people think it's only fiscal, but it's not fiscal only in Greece. It's very much the issue of competitiveness, the role that state-owned enterprises play, the role of administration or the lacking role of administration, and so forth. Which leads me to your second question. If I had one big wish, I'm torn between, so I'll have two wishes. The one wish is to have a public sector which is free from political interference, of high quality, which delivers services to the citizens so that they feel that they are being helped and not expropriated by the public sector or ignored. And the second wish would be less drama, less talking, just do it.
That was an advice to me. Anyway, thank you all. And let me just make an announcement. I've been told that there will be no break, so we're going to move right away to the conversation with the US ambassador. But thank you all for participating in this very good discussion.